Well, shalom, shalom. Welcome, welcome, world changers. And thank you again, Hannah, for the beautiful music. That was amazing as always. Thank you for blessing us with your talent. All right, so tonight we're going to pick up where we left off last night. Now, we were on a major rabbit trail last night, right? And for those of you who were with us last night, we were on a major rabbit trail because we started off Numbers chapter 1, verses 1 through, was the first paragraph we read, 1 through 5. And then we got off on talking about the whole thing about the father's line and how in the scriptures, the genealogies are always counted from, father to son to son to son to son to son. And then we got talking about Yeshua. We got talking about Jesus and all that kind of stuff, the origins of Jesus and, how that would work, if it would work, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do here, because of the fact that we were on such a quote unquote rabbit trail last night, I'm going to ask you guys first, right off the bat here, I'm going to post a poll on YouTube. Now, if you're on another platform other than YouTube, you can just let me know in the live chat if you can. Let me know in the live chat what you think I should. What direction would you like to go tonight? Would you like to go on talking again about Jesus' origins, as in his, how and where, and would it work for his? Does he have to descend from a human father in order to be considered to be the son of David? And all that kind of stuff about the righteousness of Jesus, and we can get into all kinds of stuff like that. Or do you want to just read on Numbers and just continue where we left off last night, which would be just going through some of the tribes and going on like that? So let me know what you think. Those of you who are on YouTube, especially, let me know what you think, what you guys would like to talk about, and we'll go with that. All right. So I'm game both ways. Okay. And even if we go the path of talking about Jesus' origins, we can still come back. Well, we will sooner or later anyway, Lord willing. We'll come back to Numbers chapter 1 anyways. So just let me know what you would like to do here. If you are on TikTok, just let me know in the live chat. Other than that, if you're on YouTube, let me know through that poll. And if you are on any of the other platforms, please let me know. Well, I may not be able to see your live chat, but if you really want to make your voice known, especially in a poll, go on over to YouTube and search for me over there, Christopher Enoch. Should be the first thing that pops up if you search for Christopher Enoch, and you can just vote in the poll over there. I'll leave that poll open for just a few more minutes. So I am live on X right now. I'm live on TikTok. I'm live on YouTube. Just give me a second here. I'm live on TikTok. I'm live on YouTube. I'm live on Kick. I'm live on DLive, Twitch, Rumble, BitChute, Instagram. Yeah, there we are. Just want to make sure everything is going here before I get into the thick of it here. So Instagram's going now. TikTok's going now. X is going now. Give me a second, guys. Okay. Just want to make sure everything's going here for X. Got so much going on here all at once, guys. Thank you for your patience. Just want to make sure everything is good. And also on Podbean as well, doing a podcast as well over there. Yeah, all right. Okay, I hope all is well. I hope all is good. All right, so let's see what's going on here in the live chat. Oh, you know what? I want to make sure that I'm able to see the live chat from TikTok as well. Okay. Give me a second, guys. Okay. Looks like all is well. Okay, here we are. On TikTok. Welcome, Michael, Cheryl, Shia, Judy, Danielle. Oh, it says here, yeah, of course, I got a notification saying, encourage your viewers to share your live and invite more friends. Yeah, there you go. I forgot to say that. Yeah, share the live stream. Share, guys. Share. Let's get this going. Let's get this, everybody as much as possible, going. Doug Mark says, hello, everyone. I'm looking forward to tonight's study. Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Mark, Calamento says shalom to all. Chipmunk says shalom, everyone. Rick says shalom. Al Throwback says shalom, everyone. Great blessings to all. Barbara says keep going, talking about Jesus. Okay, all right. Thank you, Barbara. Seek the Lord says shalom. And Scuds says more Jesus, please. And Cubert says shalom. And Allison says keep on teaching Jesus. Okay. Well, shalom, y'all. Blessings multiplied to you and your families. Good to see you. And Enoch says shalom over there on Twitch. Good to see you. Blessings. I pray that everything that we share here today would be a great blessing to you. Increase your knowledge of the scriptures, your knowledge of the things of heaven, your relationship with God, and your knowledge of the truth. Amen. Okay, so far we've got 89% of the people in the that voted in the poll on YouTube says, or 90% now, says, continue with what we were talking about last night, the origins of Jesus and all that kind of stuff. Okay, well, I'll leave that just for another minute or so here. Not that I think that it's really going to matter, but, just for those of you who are just joining anyways, you can join. Chipmunk says, love the music. Hannah, all right, thank you. On behalf of Hannah, thank you, Chipmunk. The Wild Way says, I have a question. What's that question there, the Wild Way? Ziggy, welcome. Margaret, welcome. Blessings. Okay. The Wild Way says, just started reading the Bible for the first time in my life. Amazing. That's awesome. That's great. Looking forward to your question there, Wild Way. The Wild Way says, I have general knowledge of the story. Okay. Yeah, most people do. Most people do have a general knowledge. The problem lies, I think, is when people get too dogmatic. I know I talk about this a lot, and, forgive me for sounding like a broken record, but, it's something that we run across so often here. And I think that we need to be open to more of a historical point of view as opposed to a theological point of view. And you'll find this the more you grow in the knowledge of God and of the knowledge of the scriptures, the knowledge of history, the knowledge of quote unquote the Bible. You'll find this even in the world today. You have people that are more theological and not so historical. Then you got more of the historians that are not so theological. And what I mean by that is, when I say theological in that context, I'm talking about more of a dogmatic kind of thing, a dogma. Don't get me wrong, it's good to be theological, but in that context, that's what I mean, dogmatic. So you got the people who are dogmatic about their certain beliefs and not so much into the historical point of view. Historical meaning, what is the empirical evidence? What is the real truth about this? Not just what is theologically correct. According to, because everybody's got their own theology, right? They say there are 45,000 different denominations, and everybody thinks they're right, and everybody claims to go by the Holy Spirit, and everybody claims to go by the Bible, and everybody claims to be the Bible church, and all this kind of stuff. But 45,000 different denominations, oh wow, that's I think that should be a very concerning thing, that we have so many schisms and divisions within the quote-unquote the church, and especially when we have the Gospel of John chapter 17, whereas pretty much the whole chapter is talking about Yeshua, Jesus, praying that his followers would be one, would be unified, would be united as the Father and the Son are united, as basically, as the Son is united with the Father, so he prayed according to that again, that his followers would be that united, and yet we have seemingly like the opposite happening, unfortunately. All right, The Wild Way says, but what I didn't expect is the mention of God creating dragons at the very beginning. I never heard of it in my life. It depends on what Bible translation you go by there, The Wild Way. What translation are you reading from when you get that? Dragons, if God didn't create dragons, then who did, right? So, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that dragons are The Wild Way says, I'm reading from Ethiopian Bible, the oldest one available. What's the date on that? Like, how far does it date back? And like, do you have evidence? Like, Matthew says, shalom, my friend. Shalom, Matthew. Welcome and blessings multiplied to you. We said this last night. I'll say it again. It says in the Holy Scriptures, and I do believe this is true, that God delights in hiding things. Like, being a wonderful Father that he is, he hides, sometimes he plays hide and seek. Not everything is cheap. Not everything is readily and easily available. I mean, like the gold is, you got to go out and you got to work for it. You got to pan for the gold. You got to pan through all the pebbles and the stones and the sand in order to find those tiny little pieces of gold. It's the glory of God to hide a matter and the glory of kings to find it out. So just because we have so many different Bible translations and so many different Bible manuscripts that are all variant with one another, just as we have so many different churches variant with one another, that doesn't mean anything other than the fact that we just have to search for the truth, and you have to be smart enough to find it. The Wild Way says, give me some time, I'll go fetch the book. Okay, thank you, Wild Way. Matthew says, seek and you will find. Exactly. And it's exciting. It's scriptural forensics. Not for the foolish, that's for sure. Rick says, searching for treasures again tonight. Of course. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Rick. Going Nowhere says, peace and blessings to you all in this chilly season. Yeah, peace and blessings multiplied back to you as well, Going Nowhere. Good that you're here, good that you're here, and good that you're going nowhere. Doug Mark says, boy, it makes it worth all the hard studying when we hit gold in the Bible. Yeah. If everything was just spoon-fed to you, then it'd be boring, right? If everything was I find it more exciting where you're looking, you're searching. It's almost like you're, well, maybe I shouldn't use this analogy, but it's almost like, you're digging through the dumpster to find the brick of gold. Once you find the brick of gold, you're set. And the excitement of actually finding it is just amazing. I mean, if you were born with a brick of gold in your hand, and where's the excitement there? Okay. Doug Mark says you get hooked. Absolutely get hooked. Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you really experience God, it's, he's irresistible. Irresistible. It is absolutely the best thing ever. As that old song goes, you can take this world, its wealth and its riches. I don't need it. It's my desire to live for him. Rick says treasure is not only for this age, but also for the age to come. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Well, let's do a little bit of... Okay, where did we leave off there last night? We have 90% of everybody here voting, so 9 out of 10 voting for talking more about Jesus tonight, or at least starting there and then going on from there. All right. Numbers chapter 1. So let's start again with where we left off last night in Numbers, and we'll just kind of spring out into what we're talking about. Now, we will be talking about things that are controversial and that people can get very emotional about. But I encourage you not to get emotional. I encourage you not to go by your feelings, but go by the facts. Okay? Because God is the God of the facts. He's a God. And in fact, he's the one who created this science. Basically, science is, the study of God's creation and how it works. He's the one who created all these laws, the laws that we read of through the scriptures, and also the laws of science and physics and mathematics and evidence and all the, he's a logical God, and he's a reasonable God, and he created all good logic and reasoning. So I think we should go by logic and reasoning more than just emotion, because what I'm going to say tonight, since you guys have voted this, I'm going to be saying some things that will make some of you, if not many of you, a little bit uncomfortable. But fear not. Keep calm and just look at the evidence. Let's set aside the theological, dogmatic part of us for a moment. Now, again, I say theological, dogmatic as opposed. What I mean is theology separated from the evidence. Now, don't get me wrong. I think evidence leads us into all good theology, but I think there is quote unquote theology that is basically pseudo theology that that's not backed up by good evidence, but rather just claims that have no support. The creed and dogma of certain churches and certain ways of belief. So I encourage y'all to come to the table, and we all should do this. Come to the table with an open mind, not an empty mind, an open mind. And, you might say, this is what I believe. That's great. Awesome. If you say that, I would highly recommend that you bring some evidence to the table. This is what I believe, and this is why I believe it. This is the evidence that supports it, not just because my pastor says so, or not just because the dogma of my particular favorite denomination says so, or just because I've been taught this ever since Sunday school. That's not good enough to me. I think it's better that we come to the table and say, this is what I believe, and this is why I believe it. Now, some of it, like in certain things, and this is okay too. It's okay to say, I don't know what to believe about a certain thing, because it's better to be honest and say I don't know what to believe about it than to say I believe something and it turns out to be false, right? Wildway says, Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, God creates the great dragons, and every living creature that is creeping. Okay, yeah. You see, this is the thing, right? We have many different translations, and different translators translate a Hebrew word in many different ways. So let's just have a peek at that there, because Wildway was talking about this. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, and let's pull out the different. Oops. Give me a second here. Okay. Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, God created great whales. It says here in the King James. New King James, great sea creatures. NLT, great sea creatures. NIV, great creatures. And ESV, great sea creatures, large sea creatures, great sea creatures, great sea monsters in the NASB. And same with the LSB and Amplified as well. And NET is great sea creatures, RSV, great sea monsters. Same with ASV, great sea monsters. YLT, the great monsters. Great sea monsters, great whales, great sea creatures. Now, if you go all the way down here to the very bottom, you'll see. Now, I'm not very familiar with this particular language here. But you see there's this root word of dragon in there as well. So I don't think that it's talking about a dragon as we would think of it, but rather as just the large animals, if you will, in the waters. So according to the Hebrew, we have sea monsters, it says here, and it's the Hebrew word tanin, which it can mean dragon or serpent or whale. Dragon, serpent, sea monster, dragon or dinosaur, sea or river monster, serpent, venomous snake. So it can mean all kinds of different things there, So whenever you see a word or a phrase in your Bible, you should always compare it with the rest of the translations, compare it with other manuscripts as well. And by the way, other manuscripts would say different things, such as if we go to the Septuagint. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the different manuscripts, but the Septuagint, very, very ancient, by the way. Now, I'm not sure, as far as I know, the Septuagint manuscript would predate that of the Ethiopian Bible is manuscripts, as far as I know. And it says here in the Septuagint, God made the great whales and every living reptile. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, there you go. The Wild Way. Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. Matthew says, if we don't get uncomfortable, we're not learning. Wow, that's awesome. I love the attitude. Thank you, Matthew. The Wild Way says this is the English translation of the Ethiopian Orthodox Scriptures by Dr. Lewis Spencer, the support of the Oxford Theology Society. Okay, so that, yeah, so there's no reference there of any of the dates of those manuscripts. The Septuagint dates more than 2,000 years old. The Wild Way says that website you showed is amazing. What is it? I'm sorry, I was on two different websites. One was the Blue Letter Bible, and the other one was BibleHub.com. Matthew says last night was a good example of looking at evidence. Well, we're going to do that tonight for sure. Going Nowhere says, I find it interesting the King James Version mentions whales specifically, whereas other translations don't specify. Yeah. So I probably what the case is like, okay, what does this Hebrew word mean? What it denotes a great sea creature. So they just have to, this is the thing, right? So Bible translators are not always translators. They are interpreters. You think you're reading you think you're reading a translation of the original manuscripts? Well, in many ways you're not. You're reading an interpretation from an unknown man that you don't even know who it was, or in some cases women that have decided what that word actually means, but it may not mean exactly that. Thank you for the follow, The Wild Way. I appreciate that. Oh, the comparison of translations? Yeah. So what I did there, Wild Way, is I went to the Blue Letter Bible and I looked up the passage. Let's just say, like, if I just type in here Genesis 1:20-21, and it comes up here, and you just click on the tools on the far left side there, click on Bibles, and there you got it all listed there, all the different. Well, I shouldn't say all the different translations, because I'm sure there are probably 1,000 that they didn't include here, but the major translations here. Wild Way says, wow, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for asking. All right. Okay. So, Numbers chapter 1. Brace yourselves, guys, because we'll continue. I'll do a nutshell version of what we were talking about last night, and then let's continue from there. By the way, guys, share the live stream if you haven't already, if it's on your heart to do so, if you think there's any possibility of someone within your sphere of influence that may be blessed by what we're going to talk about here. So, Numbers chapter 1, again, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, take a census of all the congregation of Israel by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of the names, every male, one by one, from 20 years old and upward, all who are able to go out to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall count them by their divisions. With you there shall be a man of every tribe, each one head of his father's house. These are the names of the men who shall stand with you. And then he goes through all these names of all these different tribes and the leaders of the tribes. Okay. So last night we read that, and I spoke about in order for us to understand a certain controversial issue, I think it's very important for us to be able to steel man an opposing point of view. In other words, the opposite of steel manning is straw manning. So straw manning is misrepresenting your opponent's point of view just to make it easier for you to refute and to debate. In other words, like in your own mind, you modify the argument against you to make it easier to refute. Just give me a second, guys. So one example of a straw man argument. Let's say somebody says, "Oh, I believe we should have health care for all citizens," and then an example of a straw man of that argument would be like, what, you want the government to control every aspect of your life and force you to see the doctor that you don't want to see, yada 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 yada. So it's like, the straw man argument would take the original argument and modify it in order to downplay it, to ridicule it, or to make it easier for you to dispute or argue against. Steel manning an argument is the opposite, whereas steel manning an argument is to take an argument that opposes your point of view, and if you steel man a certain argument, what you're doing is you are taking the strongest points that your opposition would have, and you are basically, you're playing devil's advocate with yourself, and taking the strongest points, the hardest points, if you will, and basically test yourself with that. And if you can steel man an argument and still win the argument over a good steel man argument, then you have a really good case. All right. So at the end of the day, it's important for us to understand all points of view, not to dismiss it, or not just to say, yeah, but, or whatever the case, not just to ignore it, but rather understand it in its very core and to its fullest extent. And as strong as we can possibly understand, like to play the devil's advocate with yourself as strong as possible, and trust that God would see to it that the truth would win, because God is the God of truth. So, having said that, when I read this particular passage of Numbers chapter 1, I think about how we have some of our beloved Jewish brothers and sisters that would look at this and they use this passage to say, look, okay, here's scriptural evidence that genealogies must be counted through the father's line, from male to male to male to male, every male one by one. So-and-so is son of so-and-so, which is the son of so-and-so, which is son of so-and-so. So that particular argument is supported in practice by the rest of the scriptures that actually go through the genealogies. Like, for example, Genesis chapter 5, Genesis chapter 11. Then we have the genealogies of the Gospels. We spoke about this last night. Matthew, Luke. It's always male to male to male to male to male to male to male. It's never, well, so-and-so is the daughter of this particular mother, who is the mother of this son, who is the son of this mother. It's never like that. It's always, this is the son of this, this man was the father of this man, who was the father of this man, who was the father of this man, or the other way around, which would be, this would be the son of this, he's the son of this particular man, who is the son of this particular man, and down through the line. So again, the many Jewish people, I've heard it from various sources, where they would say, okay, so in order to be the true Messiah, the son of David, and actually, did you guys know that in Jewish circles, we have the Messiah being called the son of David and called the son of Joseph at the same time? Isn't that interesting? Since Yeshua was commonly called the son of David in the Gospels, and he was also known as the son of Joseph as well, as his, Mary and Joseph. So the argument goes that Jesus, in order for Jesus to be the Messiah, he must be a biological descendant of a man who was a biological descendant of another man, all the way through down the line to David. Okay? So the mothers are not counted. It's never that, well, Joseph was the son of this particular mother, who was the daughter of this particular man, who is the son of this particular. It's always man to man to man to man to man to man to man. So the argument then is, if Jesus doesn't have a biological father, then how can he be the son of David? Because the mother doesn't count in the scriptures. And again, just to make it as clear as possible here, they would use this particular scripture to make their point, that it's the genealogies of the children of Israel are to be counted by their fathers' houses. Male by male, male to male to male to male. I'll just come over here to a second here. So if you look at Genesis chapter 5, for example, I mentioned this earlier. And this is a good example in practice here. Case in point. Okay, so this is how the scriptures actually list genealogies. Genesis 5:3. Adam was the father of Seth. Seth, in verse 6, was the father of Enosh. Verse 9, Enosh, the father of Canaan. Verse 12, Canaan, the father of Mahalalel. And you see, so it's always male to 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 male. Never does it mention the mothers. That just breaks the consistency of it. You look at Genesis chapter 11, same thing. I'm not going to go through it. The Gospels as well. The genealogy of Jesus according to Matthew, which is vastly different than Luke, by the way. By the way, everything from David all the way to Jesus is completely different. Apart with, I think Joseph's in both of them, like Joseph being the father of Jesus in both of them. But other than that, from David to Joseph, let's say, from David to Joseph, it's all completely different if you compare Matthew to Luke. Not only that, but the genealogies in Luke include 15 more generations than the genealogies in Matthew. Some Christians say, well, Luke is talking about the genealogy of Mary, whereas sounds all fine and dandy, and I was told this as well. I was taught this as well, some 30 years ago, and I admit I believed it and I taught it. I went with that for a little while, but I'm going to show you guys there's a big problem with that. Again, let's be honest here. Let's be honest. The problem is that, where is it here? Luke. Right. Luke chapter 3. So, yeah, a lot of Christians say that Luke is the genealogy of Mary. The problem is that Luke says Joseph, not Mary. And Matthew also says Joseph, not Mary. And Luke has 15 more generations than Matthew. So if Luke, let's just go with the, we'll just say that Luke was the genealogy of Mary, even though it says Joseph and it doesn't say Mary at all. It doesn't mention, and that would break the consistency of the, what do you call it? The precedence that has been set all the way through history and all the way through scriptures, that it has to be from man to man to man to man to man to man to man. So to sneak Mary in there, that breaks it. That breaks the protocol. But let's just assume that, whoever Joe Blow, pastor, whoever made that up, is right, and Luke is talking about Mary. Well, if that's the truth, then there's 15 generations of age between Joseph and Mary. Really? Really? I hesitate to get into all, I hesitate to get into all the details here because it's so extremely complicated. And I know some of the people that are listening to this will not be able to take what I have to say because some of the people just don't know. And you can't know just through one live stream. You can't learn this stuff. You can't really be thoroughly convinced of what I'm saying unless you spend the time that I've spent in these scriptures and poring over these scriptures and looking at it and studying it and comparing it with the other manuscripts, comparing it with the other books, comparing it with the quote-unquote Old Testament. I do believe that Luke would be a lot more historical. I do believe that Luke would be a lot more accurate than Matthew for many, many reasons. Too many for me to list here, to even mention here. If you have never watched our series of the Gospel of Matthew on YouTube, please go over to YouTube and look me up over there and watch the live stream series that we did several months ago on the Gospel of Matthew. Actually, I think it was about a year ago or so now. It was a while ago. But we go through all the details of Matthew. Matthew is, I really like the Gospel of Matthew for many reasons. However, I'm not going to deny the quirks that Matthew has. They're all different. They all got their pros and cons. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all got their pros and cons. Some more cons than pros, some more pros than cons. But it depends on which one you talk about. But with Matthew, he's a master of drama and buzzwords, where you got, like, for example, in the Gospel of Mark and in the other in Luke, and like if you got like kingdom of God, well Matthew puts in kingdom of heaven, and he puts in other things. He pads things out. He makes it more dramatic and bombastic. He always does this all the way through the Gospel of Matthew. And again, I can't do this. I can't do this justice. All I have to say is, if you're honest and you really want to know all the details of what I'm talking about, and you're really open to study it more, please check out the Gospel of Matthew series that I have on YouTube. Having said that, the Gospel of Matthew divides the genealogy of Yeshua into 14, 14, and 14. From Abraham, to David, to the exile, to Yeshua. And, because Matthew, he does this kind of stuff. He's like, he would be the perfect movie director. Really, I'm not just saying this. Mel Gibson, sorry, bud, move over. Matthew would absolutely take the cake. Matthew loves the special effects. He loves the drama. He loves to actually make things more memorable in that way. And the way he does, one of the ways he did, especially in Matthew chapter 1 here, is that he throws this magical 14 number out there. 14, 14, 14. The problem is, if you count them, especially the last 14, it's not 14. Matthew says 14, but it's not 14. It's almost like how when Matthew says, the prophet Jeremiah said this. Well, no, the prophet Jeremiah didn't say that. That was Zechariah, Matthew, but I get it. We'll cut you some slack there, Matthew, so I think that he fashioned it in this way to make it more impactful. He cut and manipulated the generations to be quite a bit different than Luke, quite a bit different than the actual historical thing, to make it work. So it's like 14, 14, 14. When it really isn't 14, 14, 14, 14. Especially if you compare it with the Tanakh as well. Anyways, so I do believe that Luke is a lot more historical. Now, before I move on talking about this in more detail, we have early church documents from the earliest of the centuries of the quote-unquote New Testament church era, if you will, that detail who Mary was and who her parents were. And if you guys have never looked this up, you'll find it super intriguing. It's like, according to the early church documents, like I'm talking about way back. Actually, I got a book here. Let me see. I got a book here right in front of me. This happens to be... So we have Pseudo Matthew. There's also another book that's available. And again, these are very old historical church documents. I shouldn't say historical, but I mean old church documents. I'm reading from The Birth or Nativity of Mary is the name of the other one. Birth, Nativity of Mary. If you look that up and you read these particular books, that date way back, way back. This is the earliest mention that we have of Mary and what family she came from and who her parents were. Now, according to those documents, Mary's parents were Jehoiakim and Anna. Her mother's name was Anna, and her father's name, Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim. Which, of course, Luke doesn't mention Jehoiakim at all in the genealogies, which again proves exactly what he actually claims. It's the genealogy of Joseph, not of Mary. Okay, so anybody who tells you that Luke is the genealogy of Mary better do some pretty good explaining, because it's not the genealogy of Mary. According to what it says, it's, according to what it says is it's a genealogy of Joseph, and the fact that ancient documents such as the birth or nativity of Mary and the Pseudo-Matthew and other Proto-Evangelion documents in old church books that were written in the earliest of centuries, they confirm, they would tell you that Mary's parents were Jehoiakim and Anna, not Haley, whatever his name is, Healy. Not. So, anyways, I would go with Luke in regards to accuracy over Matthew, knowing Matthew. As much as I love Matthew, which I do, I would go with Luke when it comes to historical accuracy. Most of the time. So maybe not all the time, but most of the time I would. So that leads us again to the whole idea. Is Jesus really a descendant of Joseph? Now, if Joseph is a descendant of David, as both Matthew and Luke claim, then that would be, Joseph would be prime, candidate to either be a Messiah or to be the father of the Messiah, especially that in the Jewish point of view, the Messiah will be the son of David and or the son of Joseph. Now, some Jews believe that the Messiah, the Messiah to come, will be both the son of David and the son of Joseph. And there are some Jews that claim that they believe that there'd be two different messiahs coming. One the son of David, the other one the son of Joseph. So, according to the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, as much as they are completely different from David to Joseph, both of them claim that Jesus is the descendant of David. If he's not the biological descendant of David, how can he fulfill the prophecy of coming from David's loins? Just a question. Is it consistent with the rest of Scripture to say that, well, yeah, Jesus' father was just God and not Joseph, so he was a descendant of David through Mary? But do we have a clear, consistent protocol of counting your messianic lineage through the mother? I'm not aware of it. Guys, if you know of any, let me know. Hello, Sonio, welcome. Reconstructing Christianity, welcome. Simply Stina, welcome. Baseball Boy, welcome. Mark, welcome. Sam, welcome. So anyways, put that out there. Let's see what we got in the live chat. King or Going Nowhere says, I'm not really a KJV only person, just found it curious. Yes. Yeah, it all depends on the translators. A whale or a great sea creature, a great sea monster, dragon, whatever. Yeah. Thank you, Going Nowhere. Joseph says, Shalom to all. Shalom, Joseph. Welcome. Blessings. Blessings multiplied to you and your family. Mazi says, Shalom all. Shalom, Mazi. Welcome. Blessings. Blessings multiplied to you and yours. Matthew says, Matthew was around when Luke was written. So is Luke correcting Matthew? Very good question, Matthew. Now, there are some scholars who believe that Luke didn't know about Matthew, and Matthew, or if Luke was first or Matthew first. I do believe that you're correct that Matthew was first and then Luke came afterwards. But we have to keep in mind that these documents, these biologies of Yeshua, were not canonized. They were not included in any kind of quote-unquote New Testament. They were just documents that were just, floating around, just making their rounds in and around the that part of the world at that time, in that day and age. Luke didn't specify that he knew Matthew, but he did say that there were many who wrote about Yeshua. So who would be many, really? All we have is just Mark, Luke, Mark and Matthew that would have pre-existed Luke. So according to Luke saying many, well, I would suppose there would be more than two in order for him to use that kind of terminology to say many. And I would think, although I'm not sure, I don't know if anybody can be really sure, that Luke knew about Matthew. It's a good possibility that he did, although they were written in different places by different people, and they probably were not even almost certainly not well distributed or copied, in the first century at all. It wasn't until later centuries that they became more popular and made their rounds. So I think it's possible, quite possible, if not probable, that Luke knew about Matthew and yes, was correcting Matthew. But Luke wrote to Theophilus. Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, the author did not specify who his audience was. Luke specified who his audience was. One man. He didn't write it to be in the Bible. He didn't write it, for us or anybody other than one man by the name of Theophilus. And he claimed that he did his best to make it accurate, which I think he did a fairly good job of doing that. So he could have had a copy of Matthew hanging around somewhere. And if he did, he could have used it for, he could have used it as one of the sources or one of the means of inspiration for him. And if he did, then he would have rejected some of the things that Matthew said in the practice of not actually copying everything that Matthew said. Yes, thank you, Matthew. Mazi says, I always thought that Matthew's story of Mary and Joseph's flight to Egypt when Yeshua was born is probably a fabrication. You may be right, Mazi. You may be right. You may be right. Knowing Matthew, For those of you who don't know what Mozzie's talking about, Matthew and Luke have their differences, to say the least. There are some things between Matthew and Luke that are outright contradictions. And I know people would try to twist it and bend it and break it in order for it to fit. You know, taking the square peg and shaving off the corners to make it fit the round hole. I mean, you know, when you got people that idolize a Bible canon and it has to be perfect, their Bible canon has to be perfect, they'll do whatever they want to do to make it perfect. Oh yeah, they're both right. You know, really? No. Yeah, you have to do some pretty impressive scriptural gymnastics and twisting in order to make it make them both accurate at the same time. Yeah, I have come to know Matthew as whoever the author was. We call him Matthew by church tradition because Matthew did not identify himself as Matthew at all. And I'm not convinced that I don't think it was the actual disciple of Yeshua for many reasons. But he did. He did do things. Again, I'm trying to be as objective and as unbiased and as factual as possible here. And I'm trying to be careful with what I say because I don't want anybody to misunderstand me or take my words for what, to misquote me. But Matthew did seem to manipulate the stories, some stories anyway, again, to make it fit with what he wanted it to fit with. In the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus was born, there's this whole thing about Herod's out to get him, and Herod's doing away with all these little baby boys, and so you got to pretty much right away take him right to Egypt, and he stayed in Egypt for an unknown period of time. Could have been up until his teen years or even later. So he was in Egypt for a long time, and then he came back from Egypt and settled in Nazareth. Whereas in the Gospel of Luke, he didn't go to Egypt. He went straight to Nazareth and settled there. Mozzie says Matthew really tries to make Yeshua look like Moses. Interesting observation, Mozzie. Rick says his flight to Mitzrayim, that would be Egypt, as warned by an angel, fits with Herod issuing an infanticide decree for under 2 years of age when Magi met Herod. Yeah, see, and I understand what Mozzie's coming from as well. It could be, knowing Matthew, it could be that he put that in there to make it fit with the narrative of the Tanakh that out of Egypt I have called my son. Now, am I saying 100% for sure that Matthew did this? I am not saying 100% for sure. I'm saying it's possible. Because if you read the stories, Matthew and Luke, they don't work together. Mozzie, really good point. Matthew's the only one that says that. Now, right there's a red flag. Especially when you have 4 Gospels that claim to all tell about the same stories. basically the biography of Jesus, a biography of Yeshua and what he did and his life story, from beginning to end, basically. When you have four and only one mentions, only one of the Gospels actually talk about something, and, it's not a big deal if it's something that's minor. That is a little minor thing, like maybe Yeshua said something a little bit different than whatever. But if you got something this is quite major, that Yeshua went to Egypt and spent years in Egypt, whereas in the other Gospels he didn't. It should be a concern for every serious Bible student, that's for sure. So Mazi says Matthew is the only one that says that, and if it was true, then how did baby Yochanan survive? Yes, John the Baptist. Very good point. Very good point. Matthew says, could it be when we look at the Gospels, we could look at them as the school of Matthew, school of school of Matthew, school of Mark, school of Luke, school of John. Yeah, Rick says, unfortunately, Matthew has some one-onlys. Yeah, a good example of that. Another good example of that, I know this is kind of a little bit off the track of we're really talking about the origins of Yeshua. But a good example of that is the end of Matthew, where you have the resurrection of Yeshua, or the death of Yeshua, and then you have all the the graves of the holy patriarchs of old break open, and all these, quote unquote saints of old, if you will, come out of their graves and walk the streets of Jerusalem. Now, again, in the quote unquote New Testament Apocrypha, it does claim that some of these people were like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Noah, Job, these kind of people like that. Now, I have no problem believing that if we have, 2 or 3 witnesses, credible witnesses that would attest to it. I would have no problem believing that even if Paul said something about it, then I would say, okay, it's a little bit more believable. If Mark or one of the other Gospels said something about it, then it's a little bit more believable. But something that significant, like, hey, guess what, man? We got Abraham from a lot more, how many, thousands of years ago. We got Abraham walking the streets now, man. We got Jacob out there. We've got Isaac. We got Job. We got the patriarchs with us right now. Let's go talk to them. I mean, if that's the real deal, why didn't Paul mention anything about it? Why don't we see anything about that in the book of Acts? Why didn't Josephus, the first century Jewish historian who recorded James the Just, the brother of Jesus, and John the Baptist, and Jesus himself, and the other players, and in the New Testament, in the first century, that would be a major event that he would have mentioned if it actually happened. Why didn't Luke mention anything about it? Mark, John, Paul, any of the New Testament authors, or any of the extra biblical authors of any of the texts, including Josephus and all the other authors of some of the ancient works that we read from the first century. None of them, absolutely none of them mention it whatsoever. Not one of them. Not one of them. How can that be? It's almost like, for example, it's almost like someone says there was a massive earthquake and the entirety of America split in half. But nobody knew about it, and nobody talked about it nowhere. No news outlet, nobody talked about it. Only one person wrote about it. That's all. That's it. Like, how can that happen? I have no problem believing that what Matthew said. I have no problem with believing it in a literal sense. You could take it in a spiritual sense, say, yeah, okay, it happened spiritually. I have no problem believing it literally if we have some more evidence behind that. Well, we don't. You know, somebody might say, well, Matthew said it, that's good enough. Well, not really, because Matthew was not written, because the idea of saying Matthew said it, that's good enough, that, again, what I suspect that kind of attitude, that kind of perspective is putting so much emphasis on the Bible canon, saying because Matthew's in the Bible, then it has to be 100% literally accurate in everything that it says, in a literal sense. But why put so much emphasis on a Bible canon when God never mentions that either? The Bible's not in the Bible. The Bible's unbiblical in that sense. Nowhere in the Bible does it talk about the Bible. And nobody, prophet, priest, king, apostle, disciple, I don't care who, nobody even claimed that God gave them a list of books to include as a Bible, a biblical Bible canon. So what does that mean for us? That means that the Bible canon, well, we have many different Bible canons, meaning we have many different Bibles with different books in any given Bible. A Bible canon is just a collection of books that have been collected and canonized, idolized as holy scripture by certain church authorities for the purpose of supporting the doctrine that they want supported, for the purpose of supporting their own church doctrine. Because like Orthodox churches have different books than the Roman Catholic Church, and Roman Catholic Church has different books in their Bible than the Protestant Church. And then we have all these other little, what do you call them? Fringe groups, if you say, they have their own little Bible canon, So just because Matthew's in the Bible doesn't really mean anything other than, whoever wrote that was fortunate enough to have it included in a list of books that's to be printed and labeled as the New Testament and reprinted for hundreds of years into billions of copies. Voice of one, welcome and blessings multiplied to you. Matthew says, Luke, etc., meaning these gospels were handed down from those who heard from Matthew, others heard from Luke. I'm sorry, I was reading half of a comment here. So Matthew was saying, could it be that when we look at the Gospels, could we look at them as the school of Matthew, the school of Luke, etc., meaning these Gospels were handed down from those who heard from Matthew, others heard from Luke? Well, they're all different. I mean, Matthew does not claim to be the same kind of a gospel that Luke does. Because Matthew is, the author is not identified. We just have to either assume who the author is or just call it what it is, anonymous. But Luke, even though he didn't identify himself, he identified his audience. It was only written for one man, whereas the Gospel of Matthew was different, written for, it seems like it could have been written for one man, but it seems like it could have been written for like a group of people, or just, it could have been even a man who wrote that down for a posterity to pass down to his children. Who knows why the Gospel of Matthew was written? It's not specified. Speaking about what I was talking about earlier there, John says, yes, great point. Well, thank you, Matthew. Rick says that Yeshua was 2 years old when the Magi arrived. Do you have evidence behind that, Rick? Mazi says, if everyone was raised from the dead after Yeshua's death, would there not be some sort of historical evidence? Exactly, Mazi. Exactly. Just like how I said, someone can go on social media and say, well, today the entirety of the continental United States completely split in half by an earthquake, divided in two. Okay, beautiful. I mean, not beautiful, but powerful story. But if no one else says anything about that, and there's no evidence of anybody ever being impacted by that at all, so how can we believe that? John says, Matthew and John are most quoted by Christians. I sense Mark and Luke might be more on point, although John has good stuff in it. Hey, I think that all of them have good stuff in it. I really do. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yes, thank you, John. Mazi says it's also contradictory to the point of Yeshua being the firstborn from among the dead. Hey, another good point as well. And so I thought about this as well. It's like, what does this mean, firstborn from the dead? Now, it sounds like it's talking about resurrection, right? And most people would understand it to mean that. And so I thought that too. I'm like, okay, so Yeshua was like the firstborn from the dead, like he was the first one from resurrected. But then I thought, no, it can't be, because we have, even in the Tanakh, we have a couple people that are resurrected in the lives of Eliyahu or Elijah, Elisha. Some could argue that even Adam himself was resurrected, as he was put on a deep sleep and then the rib taken from him in that way, if you take it literally. Yeah, so if firstborn from the dead means resurrection, then yeah, it's not true. In that sense, firstborn from the dead could mean something else, though. Could mean something that we really don't quite understand. Thank you, Mazi. Curtis says, "Who is Luke written for? Who is Luke written for?" Theophilus. He mentions that right in Luke chapter 1, also in the book of Acts chapter 1 as well, written to Theophilus. Now, I do know that some people think that Theophilus is talking about a group of people. I do not buy that, because we have Josephus, for example, that speaks about one man whose name was Theophilus. And the way that Luke is written too, the way that he worded that about being written to like this is for you, Theophilus, kind of thing. It sounds like he's speaking to one man. And the way that he wrote the Gospel of Luke as well, it sounds like if you notice the writing style of Luke, especially Acts. Not so much Luke, because I think Luke has been put through a lot more processing than Acts has been. But Acts is loosely written. Like for example, you have the 3 different accounts of Paul's conversion, and they're all quite different. and one could argue that at least two of the three are contradictory. So it tells you that it's not. Luke didn't write Acts to be like super accurate. Like he didn't go over it a lot. Like he didn't really proof it very well, which again would, in my point of view, that would uphold the idea that Luke wrote this just for one man. If he would have known that his book would be written or read and published for potentially billions of people to see, I'm pretty sure he would have proofread it way more than he did and made sure everything was just super perfect. But it doesn't sound like he actually made it that perfect. And he doesn't claim that it's the Word of God. He claims that, it sounds like he claims that it's as accurate. It's not like he, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that he made it up or anything like that, but rather he didn't claim that it's just like super perfect. Matthew says, what I mean is, did Matthew come from Matthew originally and the same with the other Gospels, all having the same point of origin? If you're talking about the Apostle Matthew or the one of the 12 disciples Matthew, I don't see a whole lot of evidence behind that. The way that it's written, the way that he speaks about Matthew, the disciple, it certainly doesn't sound like the actual author that wrote that gospel. And the fact that he copied from Mark so much, word for word. So I don't think that Matthew would have been written by the disciple Matthew. Wild Way says, thinking back about genealogy, why are you only class Jewish if your mother is Jewish? Now, so this is like an extra biblical thing you're talking about, right? So, yeah. So, like according to scriptures, it goes by the fathers, and especially the tribes, right? If Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, according to the scriptures, it has to go from father to father to father to father, not through the mother. Thank you, Wild Way. John says, I have a bugging question. Suppose the resurrection of Jesus was a fabrication. What then could Jesus have meant when he said he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Oh boy. So we're getting into, this is a little bit off the beaten track here. We have to ask a lot of questions here before we get to that point, John. We have to ask, okay, so resurrection, does that necessitate a physical resurrection? I've been taught that all my life, and I know most of you, if not all of you, have. I have also heard, and I think it's it's a decent point, that some people would say that Paul did not necessarily believe in a physical resurrection the way that he wrote it in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, especially when he said it is sown natural, it is raised spiritual. It is sown a natural body, it's raised a spiritual body, like as if it's not really raised as, like, it's not like a natural body rising. Now, Yeah, that's beyond the scope of the topic of the night, John. We don't have anywhere, as far as I am aware of, there's nobody nowhere, even in history, that has ever claimed to have the actual bones or body of Jesus, right? So I think that speaks a lot. That speaks volumes right there. I appreciate your question, John. Perhaps sometime in the future we'll do a special on the resurrection as opposed to what we did in the past. And we did specials on the baptism and on the origin as well, as we are talking about that a little bit more tonight. And then we have to ask a question, John, like when he said he will destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, is that in all 4 gospels? How many gospels is that in? Is it in Mark? And is it in Matthew because he copied from Mark? Or is it in Matthew? Is it in Luke? Is it all worded the same? You know, lots of things to ask about that. Mozzie says, I really appreciate Mark. It just gets right to the story at the immersion. I used to look at Mark differently back in the day, like a short abbreviated book, but now I really appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you for sharing, Mozzie. Rick says Matthew chapter 2 explains Herod sending out the Magi and had already assessed when the star appeared, why he said to kill under 2. Yeah, so it's not specific. Yeah, it says under 2. And again, is it in Mark? No. Is it in Luke? No. Is it in John? No. Did Paul talk about? No. So we have to question the historicity of it, because this all plays into the story of Yeshua going to Egypt, which again is nowhere else to be found other than just Matthew. But let's just say that, it happened. What does it actually say? Does it say that Yeshua was 2 years old? No. Boys under 2, he could have been 2 months old. How do we know he was 2 years old? It could have been 2 months old, but Herod just wanted to be quote unquote safe. In, maybe he was thinking that the Magi were a little bit off in their, maybe the Magi said to him, I'm just hypothetically speaking here, just assuming that it actually happened, that it's all historical. So let's just say that it actually happened. So maybe the Magi had a private conversation with Herod, and they're like, well, Herod wants to know exactly what day it was. And the Magi could have said, again, we're just speculating here. The Magi could have said, well, we don't know. It could be, we have a margin of error, maybe give or take a year. Maybe Yeshua is about a year old now, give or take a year. And so maybe Herod said, okay, 2 years old and under. Just to make sure. We don't know exactly. Unless you have evidence there, Rick, that Yeshua was 2 years old. I mean, if you do have evidence, I would love to see it. Because that would back up the whole story of Matthew, and that would be awesome. Thank you, Rick. The Wild Way says, all the world through centuries goes by father, but present day Jews, legally, apparently, your mother has to be Jewish for you to be classed as such. It's not ancient stuff, but now these days. Yes, that's true. The Wild Way. Yeah. So the whole thing about the mothers being counted for the Jewish label, if you will, uh, uh, they say that it's by the halakha, some of the more modern Jewish law, if you will, which is not really talking about like scripturally or historically in that sense. John says, sorry, I know it's off topic, but like I said, it was a nagging question for me anyway. And Mazi says, I do believe that it has something to do with the idea of Moses' body on how it was never found. That's a very powerful point as well, Mazi. The body of Moses was never found, which could mean that he was physically resurrected as well. I'm just saying, could mean. Either that or God hid him very well. If the Mount of Transfiguration was a physical appearance of Moses and Elijah, again, so we have to assume lots. So we have to assume that Elijah was taken physically and that he never died physically, and that he was brought back to earth, to the Mount of Transfiguration, physically. So if that's the case, then Moses would likely have been resurrected physically and appeared with Elijah physically in the same form on the Mount of Transfiguration. And that would be consistent. We got Elijah here, who is alive physically, and Moses that's also here, alive physically. Don says, thanks anyway, Chris. I always appreciate your feedback. Well, thank you. I appreciate your questions. Thank you. Rick says, 1 Peter 1:3, in his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of you. Yeah. So again, this is a thing. Like, how do you interpret that, right? Is this like, okay, so the way that Paul puts it, it's like, and I'm not saying that, I'm not making a claim here. I'm just saying it seems like the way that Paul puts it in many ways, like it's more of a spiritual thing, not so much a physical thing. Now, am I saying he wasn't physically raised? No, not at all. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying, according to Paul's writings, and also 1 Peter as well, the resurrection, if it was more of a spiritual thing, then you can, because you see, Paul said that we were crucified with him, we were buried with him, and we rose with him, and now we are seated with him in the heavenly realms. That's what Paul said. So right now, we are seated with the resurrected Yeshua. So if the resurrected Yeshua is spiritual, then that would work well. Because if we're truly born again, then we are in that new life. We are in that other realm. And so we are given to a new birth through the resurrection of Yeshua, which again doesn't necessitate a physical resurrection, because it could be just like if it was a spiritual resurrection, you can say, just as he rose from the dead, so we rose from the dead. Just as he is seated at the Father's right hand, so we are seated with him in the heavenly realms. Again, please, people, don't misunderstand me. Am I saying there wasn't a physical resurrection? Certainly not. I'm certainly not saying that. But I'm just covering all bases of interpretation here. And thanks, guys. Maurice, welcome. John, again, welcome. Rick says, agreed. Herod was covering his bases sometime less than 2 years old. 2 years ago born. Yeah, very well could be. Yeah, thank you, Rick. Okay, so Here's a question. If Yeshua does not have an earthly biological father, then why would Matthew and Luke go through all the trouble of listing the earthly biological lineage of Joseph? Why would Luke go through the trouble of listing the biological lineage of Joseph and say that Joseph is his father, or at least supposed father, and link him back to David as the son of David if that wasn't the case, or if that wasn't a possibility even? Matthew especially, Matthew is even more adamant, that it is very, very explicit that Yeshua came through the lineage of David down to Joseph. Mazi says Yeshua himself said in the resurrection we would be like the messengers in heaven. Yeah, another powerful point, Mazi. The messengers in heaven, of course, the angels, which for the most part, if you will, are just spiritual beings. Now, there are, I know we're talking about this, but yeah, so there are a number of different things that can happen, right? There's the basic old, the commonly adopted narrative of Yeshua died physically, and he was raised physically, and he ascended physically, period. That's one. And then there's the thing where he died physically, and he was raised spiritually, but his physical body just went the way of the earth. That's another way of interpretation. And then you have the idea that he died physically, and his physical body was transformed into a spiritual body, and then he rose. So it wasn't really his old physical body that rose, but rather his transformed metamorphosis kind of thing, almost like the tomb being a cocoon in which the caterpillar crawled and out came the butterfly. So there's that interpretation as well. Going Nowhere says, always glad I found these live streams interesting viewpoints, and I never would have considered that I've never considered otherwise. Thank you, Going Nowhere, or thought of, or thought about. Thank you, Going Nowhere. I'm glad. This is what we're, I think it's important for us to break out of the mold and the shallow shell that we've all been put in, and just like this is the doctrine. And just believe it, and that's all you got to do. Don't question it, but rather, if we break out of that and really start seeking more, I think we find more. You seek more truth. Clara says he was adopted. All right, Yeshua was adopted. So would that work with the prophecy of him being the son of David? So if you go back here to 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12, this whole thing about the prophecy of the Messiah coming, the son of David. So the prophecy is literally, I will raise up, this is God speaking to David, I will raise up your descendant, or your Zerah, your seed, your son, after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. So this word you here, or from you, has a footnote, and it says literally your bowels. So it sounds like, and I'm just saying this again, this is just food for thought. It sounds like, according to that prophecy, that the Messiah must be like a biological descendant of David, come from your bowels, your loins, come from you, and not just adopted into the family, if you will. But hey, I'm just saying, right? So is there evidence that a son can be, that somebody else from somewhere else can be adopted into the family of David and be included as being come forth from the bowels of David? Is that possible? Please, guys, is there anything out there that would lead us to believe that that's doable, that's workable in the sight of God and consistent with the scriptures? My questions are not so much rhetorical as they are honest questions. I'd like to know myself. I can't think of anything, but you guys, we're learning from each other here. Going Nowhere says, I'm all for thinking outside the box. All right, well, thank you, Going Nowhere. Curtis says, I don't think there's any distinction between the physical and the spiritual. I think more immortality is literal and real. Okay. Going Nowhere says, or trying anyway. Okay. Thanks, guys. So Matthew says, yes, adoption would cover that. I do believe you carry the name of the one who adopted you. Okay, so that's great, and I'm all for that. But I'm looking for evidence. I'm looking for, like, what I mean is, I'm open to adopt that idea for sure. If we do we have any clear evidence in the scriptures that tell us, like, is there anything where it's like, so-and-so was adopted into this family and he is from the loins of his adopted ancestors. He is from the bowels. You know what I mean? Like, so if we have that in the scriptures, then I can say, okay, yeah, well, that's great. That seems, that is a very good probability there that Yeshua being adopted was also considered to be part of the bowels of David. If we don't have convincing and clear evidence of that, I'm going to withhold on buying that idea. That's what I'm looking for. It's one thing to want to believe something. It's another thing to really have the evidence to say, okay, whether I want to believe it or not, this is the evidence and this is the truth. Therefore, I'll believe it. Curtis says, according to the Kabbalah, there is a Messiah resurrected every generation. I've never heard that before, Curtis. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's interesting. I know in the Jewish mindset, there were many messiahs. Everyone who's anointed, prophet, priest, king, any kind of thing like that, any kind of anointing is, by definition, a Mashiach. Mazi said, I always thought when I saw the explanations of the parables in the Gospels, why are we special as readers, but not most of the people listening to them? Interesting thought. Davison, surnames, plenty, which means seed of David. Yeah, it is. Yeah, David's son, the son of David. So Matthew says, if Yeshua was adopted, that if he could be called the son of David. I agree he could be called the son of David if he's adopted. That makes sense. But here's my question. Does it fit with this particular thing here where it literally says here that it says in the prophecy that this Messiah will literally come from the bowels of David? Literally from the biological makeup of David he will be a biological descendant of David in that sense. So yeah, you can take anybody from any other tribe and they can be adopted into the family, but it sounds like to me, no, hey, like I said, if you got something else that's more convincing than this, the way it puts it, like the Messiah must come through the loins of David, a biological descendant of David, not just an adopted son. Matthew said, read that again. Okay. So this is 2 Samuel 7, verse 12. God says to David, when your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. This has got a footnote here. From you. It says here, literally, your bowels. So in other words, it literally says that this Messiah will come from your bowels. So my question is, how can an adopted son fit that profile? Curtis says, why is it not referring to Solomon? Curtis, yeah, on YouTube, unfortunately, I don't think you can watch the replays on TikTok, but we spent a couple hours yesterday going through all the points of why it is not talking about Solomon. So if you're interested, go over to YouTube, look me up over there, and you'll see the live stream from yesterday. So that'll be from January 6th. And yeah, we go through all the points. We break this all down into many points, and we talk about that. Thank you, Curtis. Matthew says, so we have a dilemma. Yeah. Now, here's the thing, too. I know I'm going to get into something else, and perhaps, Lord willing, we'll get into this maybe more tomorrow. I never thought of it this way until I heard there was a Dr. Tabor was talking about this in this particular way. I've never thought about it. And please don't misunderstand me. I am not saying that this is, again, I'm not making a claim. I'm just putting this out there for food for thought. I'm not making a truth claim here. However, when I heard Dr. Tabor say this, I thought, Is it true? Can it work that way? Can you look at it this way? And I think that you possibly can. So here's what he said. He said that the way that it's worded in Matthew and Luke, the conception of Yeshua, where it's like the Holy Spirit will overshadow you and you will conceive. The way that it's worded gives room for interpretation that it could mean that the conception was a natural conception overshadowed, overseen by the Spirit of God, so that God himself used a man to do his work, as he always did. God always used men to do his work. So that's another interpretation of that as well, because it doesn't, it gets very complicated. And if God did use a biological descendant of David, I'm just saying if, I didn't say he did, I'm just saying if God used a biological descendant of David, such as someone like Joseph or anybody else that's biological descendant of David, to conceive Yeshua, then he would be the son of David, and he would fit that prophecy that he would literally biologically come from the bowels of David, come from the loins of David. So it would be a biological thing and not just an adopted thing or something like that. Mazi says, I agree that he had to be literally the descendant of David. Even people at that time knew he was from David, even from the city of David. Curtis says, but the truth is buried in the pictographical analysis. Interesting stuff. Mazi says, Yosef, or you mean Yochanan? I mean Yosef. Thank you, Mazi. Clara says, can't be, because Joseph was not going to marry her because she was pregnant. You're correct, according to the Gospel of Matthew. The problem lies when you go beyond that and you see that Matthew, in many ways, shapes and forms, all the way through the Gospel of Matthew, literally from beginning to end, you see that he fabricates things to make things work, and to make things to further the impact and the narrative that he wanted to portray. Things that Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul, and nobody else ever said, and I think is very, very possible that I think it's very easy to prove in any historical sense that some of the things that Matthew said is not particularly accurate to history. So Matthew is so much different than Luke. In Luke, it's not, that story was not there. In Matthew, it is. So we have to say, first of all, is Matthew historical? Or is Luke historical in that sense? And whichever one is historical, then we'll say, okay, since this is the one that's historical, this is the one that's more accurate to what actually happened, then let's run with that one. And that's not even to mention the other whole thing that we dealt with a couple months ago was the whole story of Pantera. So that's another whole thing. And the story goes, if you're not familiar with it, I'm not going to get into it tonight because we already did a whole live stream on that. I think it was more than one, wasn't it? Wasn't it more than one live stream we did on Pantera? So the story goes that Mary, she wasn't. Pantera had a night with Mary, and she conceived that way, and so Yeshua was known as the son of Pantera. Okay, and that's why Joseph was, the way he was. Am I saying that's true? I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying that's another whole thing behind that. There are so many different stories, so many different theories, so many different people with different ways of believing as to what actually happened. If Pantera, if there's any truth behind that, is it possible that Pantera, because Pantera was a Roman soldier apparently, is it possible that God used Pantera to bring about Yeshua? It's possible, okay? Especially if Pantera was somehow, somewhere down the line, linked to David. John says Pantera. Oh, yes, I forgot. Yeah. So that's another whole thing. Yeah. So if Pantera, but then again, why would Matthew go through the trouble of the genealogy of Joseph biologically if Pantera was the biological father? What if Joseph was the biological father? What if there was no biological father? Again, I'm just talking out loud. Matthew says, but where is the historical evidence of Pantera? Well, there's a surprising amount of it, Matthew. Check out the live stream that we had on YouTube again of Pantera. It's a surprising amount of it. Now, I'm not saying this as, again, I'm not claiming that this is the actual truth, but if you look it up, so for those of you on YouTube, I'm going to post a link to that one about Pantera in the description. And since I'm at it here, I think what I'll do is I'll post a link to the Gospel of Matthew playlist that I was speaking about. Okay, so they're both um, on YouTube right now. In the description, you'll see the link to the video about Pantera and all. And again, that goes into a fair amount of detail, and the evidence that is used to present that people use to support that, as well as the playlist on Matthew. It's right there in the description now. Mozzie says the problem with Matthew is it tries to tie Isaiah 7:14 to Yeshua, but it doesn't. It just doesn't work because the word there is not virgin. It means young maiden. Could even be a newly married woman. And it seems to be, yeah. Thank you, Mozzie. It seems to be quoting from the Septuagint as well, and not necessarily from the Hebrew there. Yeah. The word Bethuel means virgin, but the word used in Isaiah is Alma. Yes, that's true. Yep. You know, guys, true story. Back 32 years ago, I used to attend a Baptist church. And the pastor of this church was very, very strong. Talk about dogmatic. He was very, very dogmatic about the virgin birth. And I was right into it. Like, I listened to everything that he said, and he preached against this whole thing about, Isaiah 7:14 meaning young virgin or young woman instead of virgin. He preached against that. And so I remember going to a Christian bookstore shortly after that sermon. This would be in 1992, I think it was. And either 1992 or early 1993. And I went to a Christian bookstore and I purchased a book. I forget exactly what book it was, but it said exactly what you said. It said that the word doesn't mean virgin. In the original Hebrew, it means young woman. It doesn't mean virgin. And so I read that and I got angry because, here I am, a little, teenage Christopher, and I was very dogmatic myself back in those days. And I went to the owner of that bookstore and I said, listen, so-and-so, Pastor so-and-so of this church up here that I attend, he said that this is wrong. And you know what that guy did? The owner of the bookstore actually pulled the books off the shelf. But now, I know better. Now I would say, hey, I understand now. I get it. It really does mean young woman and not necessarily a virgin. Although the Septuagint does use the word for virgin there. Thank you, Mozzie. Doug Mark says, thanks for posting the links. Well, thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, lots to talk about here. I wasn't sure how the night was going to go, but yeah, sticking to the origin of Yeshua and the Father's line based on the foundation of Numbers chapter 1, talking about counting the children of Israel through the fathers, father to father to father to father, male to male to male. So how can Yeshua be the son of David through the loins of David? How can Yeshua be from the bowels of David and also come through the father's line without, not through the mother's side, but the father's side, if Yeshua didn't have a biological father? How could he be the son of David? Am I saying he can't be? No, I'm not saying he can't be. I'm just opening the question. I'm just opening, our thought processes here to say, okay, so how does this work? Really? How can we, how does this work? Does it work? Is it possible that maybe Joseph was And Matthew just kind of made it like how Matthew always does. He kind of, adds some things there to spice it up a little bit and make it sound more memorable and more, impactful. Here's a question. Just before we close for tonight, here's a question. And I need to say this because I know people misunderstand me so much and they attack me all the time because they misunderstand me. I'm not saying that he wasn't born of a virgin. I'm not saying that, but I'm just asking, I think, logical questions, down-to-earth questions. If Yeshua was really born a virgin, why didn't Mark say anything about it? Mark was the first gospel written. That means that there were many people who read Mark and they didn't know anything about Matthew, nothing about the virgin birth, nothing about Luke. They would say, well, maybe some other gospel, maybe some other writings had the virgin birth in there. Well, we don't have evidence of it. The only thing that we know of that existed before Mark, was the epistles of Paul. But Paul didn't even mention the virgin story at all. Why not? He's the first one. He would be closer to the actual event, chronologically speaking. So in the 50 plus AD. I mean, hey, if it happened, wouldn't that be a huge deal? Wouldn't they all just be like they would all know about it? I mean, if he really was born of a virgin, wouldn't it be like everybody say, wow, this is just absolutely, like, this man is absolutely, this man is just superhuman. If he was born of a virgin. What about in Mark chapter 3, when the people closest to him or his family that grew up with him from the time of birth, they all said, oh, he's crazy. We know who he is. Like, what is he? Look at this stuff. What's going on here? Like, what, why did they treat him as if he was insane? Why did they say he was insane? Because don't you think that would be like something that would be like huge news right from the very get-go. Here we got Mary, who is a virgin, and she's pregnant, and the baby's born, and wow, this goes into deep stuff, guys, because then that goes into the whole idea of why did Yeshua have to attend the baptism of repentance? Baptism of John. Why did he do that? And if he was truly, if his father was God, I'm just saying if his father was God, I'm not saying he wasn't, then why isn't it until after the baptism that the Spirit of God came on him? Why wasn't the Spirit of God on him or in him the entire time right from conception? So lots of questions. Why didn't Paul say anything about it for decades? Actually, for all of his life, Paul never said anything about it at all. See, I was taught 32 years ago that the virgin birth narrative is absolutely essential for your salvation. That's what I was taught. It's like it's an absolutely essential part of the creed. You can't be saved without it. You can't truly be a Christian without it. Well, that's what I was taught. But now, to come to think of it, so he was born, let's just say 1 AD, okay? Let's just say. I mean, I know some people say 4 BC, 4 AD, whatever the case is. Whatever. Okay, let's just say 1 AD. Let's say he was born 1 AD. So, for the first 30 some odd years, when in the Gospels even, as he's interacting with everybody, nobody mentions the virgin conception. I mean, so Matthew talks about it in the very beginning. Luke talks about it in the very beginning. But I'm talking about after Yeshua comes on the scene and he starts doing his ministry and all that kind of stuff. Nobody talks about, hey, here comes the man who's born of a virgin. Nobody talks about that. The book of Acts, nothing in there. Nothing in the book of Acts. The New Testament church, like almost every church that I've ever been to has billed themselves as being the New Testament church. And the virgin birth is a necessity of belief. You got to believe that. If you don't believe that, you're just completely, you don't even have a foundation. Well, where's that in the New Testament church? Literally, where's that in the book of Acts? Nowhere. In the Gospel of John? Nowhere. In the Gospel of Mark? Nowhere. Paul's epistles? Nowhere. In any of the other books of the New Testament? Where? Where is it? Anywhere. In the prophecies of Yeshua being conceived or born from the law and the prophets. We mentioned here, Mazi brings out Isaiah 7:14, but we know according to the Hebrew, it means young woman and not virgin. Now, that's if somebody could say, well, the Septuagint is more accurate. Well, if that's the case, then that would count. But where do we have? Where do we have the common thread? Mazi says we can really paint a more accurate picture if we connect the dots of when 2 or 3 agree on an account. Yes, that's true. Yes, for sure. Especially when we have 2 or 3 gospels that's supposed to all basically say the same thing over and over again, but they don't. So they all agree that Yeshua actually lived, and they all agree that he was baptized, and they all agree that he died and rose again. But they don't all talk about the virgin birth. Why not? Why not? Nora says, fun fact, Muslims believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, or so I've read. But that's a topic for another time, I suppose. Yeah, they do. Yeah. But another fun fact too. I mean, see, the thing is, on a Christian point of view, they say that the virgin birth is proof that the literal father of Jesus is God himself and not a man. So Christians take the one side of the coin where it's like the virgin birth, he's born of a virgin, and that proves that he was that he doesn't have an earthly father, but he only has just God. That's all. Whereas Muslims say that Jesus was born of a virgin, but they say no, he's not. It wasn't that God is his biological father, or his literal father per se. And again, it all comes down to 2 Samuel 7:12, the prophecy of Nathan to David about the son of David, about the seed of David, being both the son of David and the son of God at the same time, but still from the loins of David. Verse 12. 2 Samuel 7:12. Right. Anyways, guys, so yeah, I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. Tonight's been a little bit more focused on the tonight on the origin or the conception of Yeshua, as opposed to, I know last night we were getting into like, okay, what about was Jesus always perfect, and how perfect was he, and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't really touch on that tonight. So, what is perfect? What does that mean? Was he always perfect in every way from birth, and did he never have to learn anything, or did he actually learn stuff? Did he actually grow in wisdom as the Gospels say? And what does that mean? And all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, anyways, guys, if you haven't already, please leave a like, subscribe, and follow. If you like talking about this kind of stuff, talking about the scriptures, and getting together, at least here virtually, and discussing these kind of things. We do this every single day, night, 7 days a week. Lord willing, we'll continue to keep doing it, and we'll be back tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 7:30 p.m. Eastern, folks. We'll be back, and we'll continue where we left off again. All right. El Throwback says, excellent study. I enjoy it. Enjoy your evening. Thank you, El Throwback. Blessings multiplied to you and yours. Rick says, Lila Tov Bereans, blessings and much love. Thank you, Rick. Lila Tov, blessings multiplied back to you as well. Have a wonderful night. Going Nowhere says, sleep tight, Gators. Certainly will. By the grace of God. Going Nowhere, thank you. All right. Yeah, so keep on calling on him. Call upon his name, and he will show you great and mighty things. Things that you don't know. Jeremiah 33:3. Craig says, thank you, brothers and sisters. Blessings. Thank you, Craig. Blessings multiplied back to you. Blessings, guys. Okay, yeah. And just before I close out here, I just remind you guys as well, in about 6.5 weeks, Lord willing, in about 6.5 weeks, we'll do another fast, another 3-day fast. So that's something that's on the schedule as well. So Lord willing, we'll do that. Mazi says, shalom all. Thank you for another good study. Thank you, Mazi. Appreciate that. Thank you for your fellowship and your questions, comments. Awesome. Doug Mark says, blessings. Thank you, Doug Mark Productions. Blessings multiplied back to you as well. All right. So we'll see you again tomorrow. And we'll continue our studies here. As always, love you guys, and I pray the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, lift up his countenance upon you, and give you wonderful, wonderful shalom. Amen, amen. We'll see you guys tomorrow.